"I can make your daughter walk again," the barefoot boy said. And the billionaire who hadn't smiled in 6 years turned and froze, because something in the boy's voice didn't sound like hope, it sounded like certainty. The rain hammered down on the glass facade of St. Augustine Children's Hospital, blurring the line between the world outside and the sterile, controlled desperation inside, where Victor Hale stood motionless beside a wheelchair that had become the center of his universe. Cameras from medical journals and private consultants lingered discreetly in corners, not for publicity, but for documentation. Because when a man worth billions spends everything to save his only child, even failure becomes something people study, and Lily Hale had become the most expensive unsolved case in modern medicine, her small hands resting quietly in her lap as the latest specialist, imported from Switzerland at a cost that could fund an entire clinic, closed his leather folder with the same defeated expression Victor had learned to recognize instantly. The look that said there would be no miracle today, no breakthrough, no hidden answer buried in another scan or test or experimental treatment. There is no neurological recovery pathway remaining, the doctor said carefully, choosing words that sounded precise but felt hollow. Her condition is irreversible. And the word hung in the air like a verdict rather than a diagnosis, as if 6 years of effort, hope, money, and sleepless nights had all led to this single, final conclusion. But Victor didn't react the way people expected him to anymore. No shouting, no bargaining, no desperate last-minute questions. Because grief, when it lasts long enough, stops being loud and becomes something quieter, heavier, something that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. And he simply nodded once, his gaze fixed not on the doctor but on Lily's legs, willing them to move even though he knew better than anyone in that room that they wouldn't. Outside, the storm intensified, thunder rolling like distant artillery, and security guards at the entrance shifted as a small figure appeared at the edge of the hospital steps, barely visible through the rain, a boy no older than 12, his clothes soaked through and clinging to his thin frame, his feet bare against the cold marble as he stepped inside without hesitation, drawing immediate attention not because of who he was, but because of where he clearly did not belong. And before anyone could stop him, before security could reach him, his voice cut through the polished silence of the lobby and carried all the way down the corridor to where Victor stood. "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." And the words didn't just interrupt the moment. They shattered it, causing heads to turn, conversations to stop. And for the first time in weeks, Victor Hale looked up sharply, his expression not hopeful but irritated, because he had heard variations of that sentence before, from doctors, from experimental researchers, from people who claimed breakthroughs and delivered disappointment. And yet this was different, because this voice didn't come from a man in a suit or a professional with credentials. It came from a boy who looked like he had nothing, a boy whose presence in a place like this was itself an anomaly. And security moved quickly now, their training overriding the shock as they approached him with firm, practiced steps. "You can't be in here," one of them said, reaching for the boy's arm. But the boy didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't even look at them, his eyes fixed instead on Lily as if she were the only person in the room. "I'm not lying," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the tension building around him. "But you won't believe me." Just like the others didn't. And something about that line, about the way it suggested this wasn't the first time he'd said it, wasn't the first time he'd been dismissed, made Victor hesitate just long enough for curiosity to slip through the cracks of his exhaustion, because for 6 years he had chased every possibility, every rumor, every experimental procedure. And here, standing in front of him, was something he couldn't categorize, couldn't file away as another polished presentation or clinical report, just a boy in the rain making a claim that defied everything he had been told. And Victor let out a slow, humorless breath. "I've spent $40 million trying to fix her," he said, his voice carrying across the room, not angry but cold, measured. "The best doctors in the world have failed, and now you're telling me you can do what they couldn't." And the room seemed to lean in, waiting for the boy to falter, to backtrack, to reveal himself as another illusion in a long line of false hope. But instead, he simply nodded once, as if the question itself didn't intimidate him. "Yes," he said, and the simplicity of that answer. No explanation, no hesitation, was what made Victor freeze. Because confidence like that didn't belong to someone with nothing. And for a moment, just a moment, the billionaire who controlled entire industries, who had negotiated deals worth more than most people could imagine, found himself unable to respond, caught between disbelief and something far more dangerous, the possibility that this boy believed what he was saying, and that belief, however irrational, had a weight to it that logic couldn't immediately dismiss. And around them, the hospital. Staff shifted uncomfortably, doctors exchanging glances, security waiting for instruction, the storm outside continuing to rage as if mirroring the tension inside. And Lily, who had been silent through all of it, lifted her eyes and looked at the boy for the first time, really looked at him, and in that brief, quiet connection, something passed between them that no one else in the room could explain, something that made Victor's chest tighten unexpectedly, because after 6 years of watching her withdraw, of seeing hope fade from her expression, there was now a flicker, small, fragile, but unmistakable, and it was directed not at him, not at the doctors, but at this boy who had walked in from the storm and spoken a sentence no one else dared to say anymore. Victor should have dismissed him. Every instinct, every lesson from 6 years of false hope told him to. But desperation doesn't disappear, it just waits. And something about the boy's calm certainty made it impossible to ignore. "You have 5 minutes, Victor said, his voice low and controlled, immediately silencing the protests from doctors and staff as the boy stepped forward, water dripping from his clothes onto the polished floor, his presence drawing every eye in the room, not because of authority, but because of how completely unafraid he seemed. "What's your name?" Victor asked, studying him carefully, searching for hesitation. "Eli," the boy replied, before turning fully to Lily and kneeling in front of her as if nothing else existed. "Do your legs feel asleep all the time?" he asked gently, and the question hit harder than anyone realized, except Victor, because that detail had never been shared publicly, not even with most of the medical team, and Lily, after a pause, nodded. "Yes," she whispered, sending a ripple of tension through the room as one of the specialist stepped forward. "That's a common no." Eli interrupted softly, his certainty cutting through the explanation. "It's not what you think." And he lifted his hand, hovering it just above her knee, not touching. "Your legs aren't the problem," he said, pointing toward her lower spine. "The signal is blocked, not broken." Murmurs spread instantly, disbelief mixing with irritation. "That's medically inaccurate," a doctor snapped, but Eli didn't even look at him. "Then why does the pain come back at night?" he asked quietly. "Burning, like something is trying to wake up?" And this time there was no response, just silence, as Victor slowly turned toward the doctors, his expression darkening. "You told me she was stable," he said, but no one answered, and Eli leaned closer to Lily, his voice softening. "Do you trust me?" he asked, and for a moment the room held its breath, because trust wasn't something easily given after years of failure. But Lily looked at him. Really? Looked, and nodded, small but certain. "Okay," Eli said, closing his eyes. And at first, nothing happened, just silence stretching long enough for doubt to return, for the doctors to shift uncomfortably, for someone to prepare to step in. But then Lily gasped, her fingers tightening around the armrest, her body tensing. "Dad," she said, her voice shaking. "My legs." And Victor moved instantly. "What?" he demanded, his composure breaking. "I feel something," she whispered, and the room erupted into chaos, doctors rushing forward, machines beeping, voices overlapping in disbelief. "That's impossible," someone muttered, but Eli opened his eyes slowly, as if none of this surprised him. "She's not broken," he said calmly. "She just forgot how to connect." And Victor stared at him now, really seeing him for the first time. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice quieter, edged with something unfamiliar, and Eli hesitated before answering. "My mother used to work here," he said, "before she died." The words settling heavily in the room. "She told them about this years ago," he continued, glancing briefly at the doctors, "about how the body can heal if you activate the right pathways." Victor's instincts sharpened instantly. "What was her name?" he asked, and Eli met his gaze directly. "Dr. Amaran Wosu," he said, and the reaction was immediate. The chief neurologist's face went pale, another doctor looked away, and Victor saw it. The recognition they couldn't hide. "You knew her," he said, not asking but confirming, and when no one answered, Eli did. "They fired her," he said quietly, said her work was too unconventional. And in that moment, as Victor looked around at the experts who had failed him, at the system he had trusted for 6 long years, and then back at the boy who had just done the impossible, something inside him shifted, because the answer he had been searching for might not have been impossible at all. It might have been ignored. Victor didn't hesitate this time. Whatever doubt he had left was crushed under the weight of what he had just seen, and as the room buzzed with panic and disbelief, he turned sharply toward the staff, his voice cutting through the chaos like a command. "Everyone out," he said, and when no one moved fast enough, his tone hardened. "Now." And within seconds the doctors, the specialists, the observers who had spent years failing him filed out, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than anything before. Just Victor, Lily, and Eli standing in the aftermath of something none of them could fully explain. Victor stepped closer, his composure gone, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar as he looked down at the boy. "Help her," he said, not as an order this time, but as a plea, and Eli nodded simply, as if this had never been about proving anything, only about doing what needed to be done. And over the next hour, under the quiet hum of machines and the fading storm outside, he guided Lily through small, deliberate movements, not forcing, not pushing, but teaching her body how to remember, how to reconnect, each second stretching into something fragile and uncertain until finally, almost imperceptibly, her foot moved, just a fraction, but enough to shatter 6 years of hopelessness in a single moment, and Victor froze, his breath catching as tears he hadn't allowed himself in years finally broke free. "Dad, I did it," Lily whispered, her voice filled with something he had nearly forgotten existed. Joy. And he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if letting go would undo it all, before turning back to Eli, searching for words that suddenly felt meaningless. "Anything," he said, his voice breaking. "Money, a home, a future, whatever you want." But Eli shook his head, his expression calm. "I just want my mother's work to matter," he said quietly, and Victor straightened slowly, something shifting behind his eyes, not just gratitude, but resolve. "It will," he said, and this time it wasn't hope, it wasn't desperation, it was certainty, because in that moment, the billionaire who had tried to buy miracles finally understood something far more powerful. The truth had been there all along. It just took someone no one believed to prove it.